I thought it would be important to set the stage a little bit, as Scott alluded to. The Alliance for Audited Media was founded 100 years ago by the ANA as the Audit Bureau of Circulations. And if you fast forward 80 years, in 1996, we opened a digital advertising service and have been involved in this space ever since. In 2003, there was an opportunity for myself and some other colleagues to create ImServices group, which is a digital auditing services group that continued to provide similar services to our clients. And what happened is we found that there's a need for verification services in this industry. And what I want to talk about are the advantages of having audits and how do we start, okay? Where should we start? Obviously, earlier today, TAG was mentioned, and the Trustworthy Accountability Group is in a transformation to provide those verification services that are really, if you think about it, in traditional media, are bread and butter. Advertisers are accustomed to those services. In the digital space, I've been involved in it for over 20 years. It's not bread and butter. Some companies are being held accountable to their platforms and ensuring accountability, but at the end of the day, there's not an overall requirement. And as we go forward, we need to look at what assurance provides. Competitive advantage. Independently verified metrics are the benchmark of accountability. An advertiser preferred in traditional media, and really sets you apart from your competition. Commitment. It shows that you're committed to being a good steward of the advertising dollar, okay? Accountability. This is really kind of the key here. If you look at the accuracy, reliability, and consistency of the metrics that are being used to buy and sell advertising across the digital ecosystem, which leads into comparability. You have apples to apples comparison when you're holding each other accountable to the same standards and industry best practices. And as those are evolving, as we talked through today, with malware, fraud, piracy, those are going to become the benchmarks for the continued evolution of this industry. Now, how do we start? TAG is a great start. We're coming together as an industry to form a group, or a club, if you will, similar to what we did with ABC back 100 years ago. Advertisers and agencies came together with publishers and came up with a set of rules that everybody would play by. Those rules define the standards and best practices that everyone is held accountable to. Transparency is critical as we look at getting back to the basics. Andrew mentioned earlier today the necessity to get back to transparency. And actually, in an article that I wrote last week, talked about transparency, not only in the pricing, but also publishers no longer need to obfuscate their URLs because there's no benefit. The buyers need to know where their ads are running, and that's critical for this industry to continue to grow. I'm going to back up. Wanted to mention one other thing with respect to transparency. Probably most of you folks saw the article last week where Kraft is basically ignoring 75 to 85% of impressions because of several different reasons, but fundamentally the lack of transparency. Now, if you want Kraft dollars in your pocket, you're going to have to become more transparent. Show your commitment. You need to show your commitment. By joining with the TAG program, becoming certified to industry best practices, by participating and getting involved in the IAB Quality Assurance Guidelines 2.1. As those guidelines evolve, you're showing your commitment to the industry. And then lastly, trust but verify. We talked a lot about today about having these services ensure that the advertiser is spending their dollar and getting what they're paid for. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure that they are. We have trusted for a long time, for over 20 years, without verification. Okay? We need to come together and we need to be held accountable. We need to hold each other accountable to the industry best practices. So when you look at the Lumascape and you see the marketing side on the right, on the left, and the publishers on the right, and everyone in between has to hold each other accountable. I can tell you the bad actors are not going to join TAG. They're not going to hold themselves up to a certification, okay? And in order to root out the bad actors, we need to trust but verify. You need to be able to transact with trust in this industry so that we can grow the industry, so that we can move dollars from other media into the digital industry, and that we can be successful.